Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you all for joining us for another 30-minute skills. For those here for the first time, welcome. These monthly lessons are a quick and efficient way to hone your reporting skills and build on your First Amendment knowledge. But they're also more than that. As those who join us every month already know, these lessons are a way for you to reconnect with a community of journalists, researchers, attorneys, and academics. To everyone, please use the chat to introduce yourself, showcase your own work, and connect with others. Also, make sure you register for our upcoming lessons on how to create your own podcast and how to start a nonprofit newsroom, among many other classes. Registration links and all previous lessons can be found at nefac.org/30-minute skills. Today's presentation is focused on immigration reporting. It is supported in part by the estate of Gloria L. Negri. Gloria was a trailblazing journalist at the Boston Globe for more than 50 years, and this program is part of her legacy of newsroom education and her lifelong commitment to local journalism. You can learn more about Gloria and other NEFAC supporters at nefac.org/supporters. During today's presentation, I again encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and share your own experiences and resources. You can also use the chat or the Q&A button to ask questions of our instructor, and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so let's get started. Julia, all yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name's Giulia McDonnell, Nieto del Rio. I'm the immigration reporter at the Boston Globe. Yeah, thanks so much for joining. I've been at the Globe for about a year now, and before that, I was at a nonprofit newsroom in New York for several years, which covers immigrant communities there. So let's get into it. All right. So I'm going to start out with talking a little bit about sourcing and immigration reporting. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the topic right now, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, where kind of I find my best sources and some of these. I'm sure there'll be a lot of overlap with other beats. I do find that immigration kind of touches, every other beat that we can think of. And I work with a lot of other folks and other amazing reporters in the newsroom to report out stories together since there's so much overlap. But going through some of these sources, immigration lawyers have been super helpful and important in my reporting. I find that even just reaching out to local immigration lawyers, finding, local nonprofit groups that provide pro bono representation, and private attorneys as well, can be really helpful for finding stories. And, maybe at first just kind of keeping in touch with people so that they get to know you better once they might have an interesting case or a situation that they might want media coverage for. That has been super, super helpful for me. Also, immigration lawyers are really on the ground a lot. So some of the places where you might find them might be in immigration courtrooms. Obviously, they meet with their clients face to face. They're in touch with immigrants who may be in detention or places like that are really harder for us to access as media. And so they're often, a helpful kind of go-between for us as immigration reporters. Obviously, community immigrant advocates. When I first started at the Globe, I moved from New York and I spent just a lot of time in person in, immigrant heavy communities. And even if it wasn't for a specific story, kind of going to community meetings, being in person, meeting folks on the ground across Massachusetts, Chelsea, Everett, New Bedford, some of these communities that have really, really strong immigrant advocate kind of uh, uh, they have built a really strong immigrant advocate community over the years. And, I find it the best kind of way to get in touch with those folks is in person so they can really get to know you. And then if they have any tips for future stories or want to let you know about a situation happening to a family or a certain person there, they can reach out later. Obviously, immigration policy experts, some groups that are great at kind of just talking through the constant changes in federal policy and in local policy are the Migration Policy Institute, even, immigration attorneys at places like the ACLU, your local ACLU chapter. I find that they're very helpful for explaining how federal policies might affect, yeah, kind of your local area, if you are kind of focusing more on that kind of situation. Something that I like didn't totally realize, but now I'm really constantly in touch with state and local representatives. Oftentimes, I find, especially in Massachusetts, in some of these situations, families or an advocate will reach out to state and local reps if there's a situation, especially around immigration enforcement action. So I try to keep in touch with state and local reps who know what's going on the ground with their offices, and it often can be a very useful source of information. One of the harder things I think has been kind of speaking to folks inside of, immigration enforcement. So I have, what I have found helpful is speaking with former ICE officials or ICE agents, people who have actually enforced federal immigration policy, or even, former contractors. For example, I did a story a couple years ago about the SmartLink application, and spoke to people who had worked as case managers on that application, which basically enforces the rules when someone has to do ICE check-ins and stuff. They can do it remotely. People who have recently left positions of immigration enforcement can be really useful sources of information. Obviously, religious leaders, I really feel like in any kind of beat, they folks can be a really, really useful source of information, but obviously, especially in immigrant communities. Again, I have spent time on Sundays when I first started the beat. I would just sometimes go to local churches, try and meet as many pastors or other religious leaders as I could, because that is really kind of where folks sometimes bring their most vulnerable selves, and share some of the most intimate parts of their life. And kind of it really helps you get embedded in the communities if you can be there for some of those services or whatever it may be. I mean, they're really hearing directly from people. Um, Social media can be super helpful, as with any beats, but obviously I always make sure to verify. But especially now that ICE enforcement actions have ramped up, I find, I cover a lot of the Latino immigrant community, and videos are constantly being shared of ICE enforcement actions and where they're happening. And so I try to keep up, because it is really kind of hard to find that information out on our own. We obviously need to verify before reporting anything, but sometimes even the folks who run those Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups where they're sharing that information, they get individual tips or videos or whatever it may be from people in the community, so they can also be really helpful sources as well. I mentioned LinkedIn because when a lot of visa terminations were going on for international students, obviously Massachusetts being a state with a large percentage of international students, I actually found that some students were posting about this on LinkedIn. For example, when the Trump administration said they were not going to allow Harvard to enroll international students anymore, we were able to find a lot of sources on LinkedIn, either of incoming students or current international students, who were posting about the situation, and really were helpful in giving insight into what it felt like to be an international student during this challenging moment. And obviously, the number one is the immigrants who are in the communities. Part of them, again, as I said, I do try and spend as much time in person in these communities as I can. Some of my best tips over the years have come directly from immigrants themselves. And that's been, over my past year at the Globe, when there was For example, a lot of there were migrant families who were sleeping on the street last summer. I just went to shelters and spoke to folks directly and ended up hearing over the weeks, some of them would text me and say, "Hey, I got kicked out. I don't have a place to sleep." And I would show up, to a church where they had found a place to sleep, or I mean, not permanently, or even just outside a T station, because I had been able to make direct contact with them, and those ended up being some important stories last summer. Here, we'll go to the next slide. So I wanted to go through some tips on places like specific to immigration reporting on where to find stories right now, particularly under the Trump administration. So related to kind of enforcement actions, I have found that going through federal habeas corpus cases in the district courts has been helpful. In most, or in a lot of states, I know in Massachusetts, you can't actually see the complaint directly for a lot of these immigration cases, but it will say, that it's a habeas corpus case, and that's often when someone is detained and there's an attorney or someone on their behalf saying that they were unlawfully detained, and trying to get them out of detention. And those can be some really interesting cases. And often the attorney's number is the listed on that case, and so maybe they could share more information about the case. But going through some of these cases has really helped me understand in the last few months who is being detained, where they're being detained, in what way they're being detained, so that we can really keep track of like how these detentions are happening. Because it's, again, hard to get information sometimes from the federal government. And so even, some of them have ended up with individual stories. Some it's just really helped background reporting and helped me inform myself of what I should be keeping a lookout for. This happened, if I'm sure some of you saw, for example, at the Burlington field office, the ICE field office in Burlington, Massachusetts. A lot of the folks detained there, some of them had filed through attorneys federal habeas corpus cases, and we were able to speak to some of those detained there and detail some of the conditions that they said were happening inside the facility. Also, right now under the Trump administration, obviously we see detention capacity expanding a lot. And, we've seen even here in New England, the numbers of people held in detention increasing, as well as transfers to other states. So transferring people who have been detained in New England to other states as far as Mississippi, Texas, New Mexico happening. And so we try to keep track of that. There is on the ICE website, there is a link to like how many people are being held in which detention facility. Also, I find it helpful to actually reach out to the local sheriff's office or the local county office that may be contracting with ICE, just to get a sense of the numbers. I do that every so often. And so I can see I have like a track of, okay, this was how many people were detained at this point, and this is how many people are being detained, 1 or 2 months later. It's hard to get like really exact data on that. So actually kind of keeping in touch with the local county offices. For example, the Plymouth County Sheriff's offices, the only detention center in Massachusetts, their office is usually very helpful with sending along the numbers of people held in ICE custody. So yeah, I try to also keep track of who might be leaving agencies related to immigration enforcement, and the courts. So recently, immigration courts are kind of notoriously hard to access. The public is supposed to be able to sit in, but a judge, depending on the hearing, a judge can decide whether or not a member of the press can sit in, especially if it's an asylum hearing or something of that nature. But recently, the Trump administration has been firing several of the judges who have been, hired at the immigration courts in the past few years. And so I've kind of been keeping track of who has been leaving and why. They know a lot of folks in the system and know a lot of the ins and outs. And so it's helpful to always see, who's leaving. And that goes also for people involved, yeah, who might be in I0 or HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. I try to kind of do some LinkedIn sleuthing and see who might be leaving the agency. Um, we in Massachusetts, we started seeing a heightened number of arrests. There was a lot of fear in the first few months of the Trump administration, which is still permeating. But we really saw a heightened number of arrests start around like March, April, and then May. We saw immigration agents basically say that they did go through something that they called Operation Patriot, where they arrested almost 1,500 immigrants in a month, which was quite high for Massachusetts. And so I just went to some of these places where this was happening. And even if, you don't get there at the exact moment when you see the arrest happen, sometimes they're really fast. It's hard to get there exactly at the right time always. But I've witnessed, several times where I could see the aftermath or in immigration court because of tips that I was getting from sources who were in the court. I was able to witness ICE agents in the court and see one of these arrests happen. So, I always, depending on, whether you have the bandwidth for doing what you can that day, if it's a daily or whatever it may be. Obviously, we don't always have the bandwidth, but I try as much as I can to be in the place where I've heard that there was an enforcement action. And obviously, we all can't do that all the time. We have many different assignments, but even if I don't see the actual thing happen, there's often a story there or someone to keep in touch with, a news source to make. And yeah, it's been helpful to see what that's like in person. Again, immigration lawyers, very, very helpful sources. I try to just kind of check in and see if they have any interesting cases with lawyers who I've been speaking to over the past few months. I talked a little bit about going to immigration court. It's a really kind of interesting experience to see what the immigration court process is like. And so, I when I can, when I don't have, maybe a daily assignment, I have spent some time there and just sitting in on hearings and seeing kind of what tips you can get from there. Some of the detained hearings are very interesting as well, if the judge lets you sit in, because you hear some of the bond hearings where you can kind of hear about how someone was arrested, what their family ties are, what their ties to the community are, where they're being held. And sometimes people appear on screen from detention as well. And so, yeah, and there are two immigration courts in Massachusetts, one in Chelmsford, where a lot of judges have been pressured to leave, decided to leave, or have been fired in recent months, or the Boston Immigration Court. And the detained hearings happen at the Chelmsford Immigration Court. Um, yeah, these are, a couple more tips here. I do always ask myself, with so much going on during the Trump administration, how are federal policies impacting our local communities? Here in Massachusetts, something we've obviously been thinking about a lot is TPS holders and how the Trump administration efforts to revoke TPS are affecting so many of our local TPS holders from Haiti, from um, Nicaragua, from Honduras here in Massachusetts, particularly the Haitian population, which is really significant here in Massachusetts. And, this is really like every day when there's a new federal immigration policy, that's the first question I ask myself. I'll, send out a few texts, send out some emails, see what my sources are hearing and feeling, and kind of decide from there whether this is, something we have to jump on immediately. We'll talk with my editors about whether it's something we want to do more long term, etc. Business owners can be very helpful sources. You know, there are immigrant business owners themselves, so many business owners who employ immigrants, who are seeing every day kind of what is happening to immigrant communities as in the past 6, 7 months, these new kind of immigration policies have taken hold, whether that's people not coming to work, people having their work permits revoked, businesses not having enough workers, or having enough customers actually coming in immigrant communities because people are nervous to go out on the streets. We haven't seen, the large scale raids as much maybe as we have seen in the LA area or, across California, but we are seeing some enforcement actions in Massachusetts that have been really difficult for some of the immigrant communities here and that have impacted you know, businesses, schools, all kinds of sectors of the community. And so yeah, anyways, and yeah, my last little tip is I had an editor say this here, and it's actually really helpful, but to basically write as much as you can when you get started. When I first started here, obviously I was in like a new state. I didn't have a ton of sources here. And so I just tried to get my name out there a lot. And I feel like once I started doing that, I also started getting tips and people reaching out to me. Whereas at the beginning, it was, a lot of my own outreach, which of course I still do. But it's helpful to just have your name out there, tied to if you want to get into immigration reporting, to just even if it's, a short story about a rally happening one day or a hearing happening, that you know, wouldn't always cover, to just see your name attached to those types of stories can be helpful. And then obviously, a lot of challenges can come with immigration reporting. So many folks right now are scared of talking to the media, understandably, because of their fears of repercussion due to their immigration status. And even if they do have a legal status, there have been heightened enforcement actions that have obviously, the enforcement actions that have detained even U.S. citizens, whether it's for a short time. And so it's really important, I think, to have those conversations with sources. On some stories, we only use a first or middle name. Obviously, that's completely up to editorial standards of your own newsroom. But, you know, I operate by, we don't want to do any further harm. And so I try the best as I can to really like be open to questions from sources about where the story is going to go, what kind of what they might feel comfortable with name wise, what we can kind of do to tell their story in a way that we minimize, any negative repercussions that could come from it. Um, Language and cultural barriers, obviously immigration reporting, we talk to folks from all over the world. Having, I think I'm a native Spanish speaker. I speak some French, which has been helpful with, reporting on Spanish speaking Latino communities here and the Haitian communities here. But, I still like, there's a large Brazilian community. I don't speak Portuguese. I can kind of understand it. But anyways, I think like having that trust through language can be really helpful. And there's always going to be some folks who you might not be able to speak to. And so in that situation, I do find that having an in-person translator is always the best. We've done like some translators over the phone, but it's just a lot easier, I think, in person to kind of understand each other more, and all that. It depends obviously on your newsroom and that kind of thing, but I've always found that to be helpful. Okay, I'm going to go through this quickly. Yeah, I think the fact checking thing can be, hard with a lot of immigrant communities who may not have kind of documents or often you can't access documents about their cases. And so some of the things that I've found helpful is to, if they have a lawyer, I often ask the lawyer for their documents in immigration court, because sometimes DHS will submit documents to the immigration court that you really can't access any other way unless the source specifically or the lawyer shares them with you. Also, often if someone tells you a story about crossing the border at a certain time or whatever it may be, I sometimes ask for videos or photos that might have timestamps on them. If, they tell you they were so many days in the city. If there's any messages that they can show you to kind of verify the information you're being given, that's always kind of helpful. Um, okay. Here are just some examples of recent stories that we've done. I thought this was like kind of interesting because we didn't know exactly what the Trump administration actions were going to look like. And with our editors, we came up with the idea. There was this big raid in New Bedford in 2007 of kind of going back to these families and seeing what they were feeling so many years later, right before the Trump administration or right before Trump's inauguration. And, it turns out, obviously a large scale raid in that sense hasn't happened so much in Massachusetts, but now we were able to do a story about, we were talking about what the kids went through back then in 2007 and a really similar kind of situation happening now with kids in Massachusetts who don't have parents. So we're thinking also like historical context. How can that be moved forward? Now, how can the historical context of immigrant communities and actions kind of impact your reporting now? I just thought that was an example I'd like to show. Anyways, I'd love to do some questions. I know I kind of went over, but
Great. Thanks, Julia. Yeah, we do have two questions quickly before we wrap up here. The first is related to conducting safe interviews. Do you have any advice for sourcing advice for keeping interviews safe, maybe creating a hotline or some other method for people to get information to you while also protecting their individual safety?
yeah, sure. I mean, WhatsApp is pretty good. I use WhatsApp all the time. A lot of my sources don't use Signal, but I often tell them that, they can call me first, if they want to talk and make sure like I'm a real person or whatever it may be. It's helpful sometimes to get like a referral if they're working with a community advocate who knows me. Then usually they're more open. I do find people feel more comfortable in their own homes. So I often go over to sources' homes if they don't feel comfortable going out at the moment or whatever it may be. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time before kind of getting to that step. So I often find like a WhatsApp phone call to be helpful. Yeah, hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, one more. This might veer into certain newsroom policies, but maybe you could speak to it generally. Navigating language issues, the language that you use in your reporting, like using terms such as illegal immigrants versus undocumented immigrants or migrants. The phrases and language we use in our reporting, are there any good practices that you could recommend to everyone as they move forward?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the newsroom, but what I have found to be pretty, you know, a good practice in general that I think a lot of newsrooms employ is like explaining maybe how someone is here, whether they don't have a legal status. Okay, how did they come into the country? Did they overstay a visa? Did they cross the border and apply for asylum? Sometimes that's a better way of kind of using language to explain someone's situation. And that way you kind of have more detail too, because some of these terms can be just extremely general, but so that's kind of what I veer towards when we can.
Great. Thank you. We are out of time, unfortunately, but Julia, really appreciate this lesson, all of the information you provided for us, and thank you for all of the work that you do at the Boston Globe. And many thanks to everyone who joined us today. We provide these lessons as a public service to you. So please return the favor and encourage your colleagues and friends to join us each month. We have a lot to learn from each other, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. On behalf of NEFAC, thank you for all you do, and we'll see you next month for our next 30-minute skills. Take care, everyone.